So you're learning legal English, you might be training to become a lawyer, you know that English is going to be a big part of your professional future. You might be asking yourself the question, do you really need to learn legalese? Do you really need to use legalese? In this video, I'm going to answer those questions and share with you some thoughts, opinions, views that I have, having worked in this industry for a number of years. Hopefully there'll be something that you will take away from this video. These are some of the main conclusions from this video, so if you just want to take away the main points of this video, these are they. Yes, as legal professionals, of course, you need to be able to understand legalese. That goes without saying, but no, you should not be using legalese in your own communications at all. Legal English doctrine is 100% clear about that today. Legalese is hated by the public and legal professionals. This should not come as a surprise. Everyone likes complaining about legalese. What you might not know is that using legalese actually might make you look stupid, might make you look as if you don't know really what you're talking about. We know this thanks to empirical studies, and of course using legalese might make you open to attack if you misuse legalese. And legalese, those legalese adverbs, are misused a lot. If we have a look at the legal doctrine, particularly chapter 2 of the plain language ISO 24495, where you can see above my head here, there are 4 guidelines as regards how you should be communicating your legal communications. And we can see that legalese, if you use legalese, fails 3 of those guidelines, maybe even 4 of those guidelines. So those are the main conclusions. In this video, I'm going to go into those in a lot more depth, talk about them a little bit more broadly, give you some more ammunition to help you understand why you shouldn't be using legalese. So let's get started. First of all, let's have a discussion about what is legalese. And a good place to start is normal dictionaries. If we have a look at this dictionary entry, we can see it's the specialized language of the legal profession. If we have a look in this dictionary, we can see it's the language used by lawyers and in legal documents that is difficult for ordinary people to understand. So not just a language, but a language which is difficult for people to understand. If we have a look at Black's Law Dictionary, this is available online, the 2nd edition, we can see that legalese is translated or defined as a modern word that is used to describe the legal and technical language used to write laws, wills, and other legal documents. So what is legalese? It's fair to say that it's understood as being a language. It's the technical, specialized language of law. And this is where we have our first problems. Because if we think of a language, and let's just think of any language, okay? So I'm going to think about, let's say, Turkish or Mandarin or something else. So if I'm looking to learn that language, to communicate that language, straight away I'm thinking of a number of different things which ultimately are hurdles to speaking that language. First of all, the vocabulary is different to the vocabulary I know. That different languages use different words to describe the same thing. That goes without saying, but I have to learn those things. There might be special structures that those languages use that my mother tongue doesn't use. If we think in terms of European languages, I know that the structures that we use in English are different to the structures that you might use, for example, in German. I have to spend time learning this and understanding this. I have to, when I just understand those words, particularly as regards if you're learning English, words can have an idiomatic meaning and a literal meaning. So if I'm using words literally, but other people are using those words idiomatically, then there are barriers, maybe even cultural barriers, to understanding exactly what that language is. I need to spend time, I need to spend money. I know that this process is going to be long. So therefore we can think that languages by nature are exclusive in as far as they exclude people, not that they are inclusive, that they include people. For example, you might be at a conference, you go to a conference, let's just say that you speak English, you don't speak Italian, but there are some Italian lawyers who are just speaking Italian. You are excluded from that conversation because they are speaking a language that you don't know. So by nature, languages are exclusive. If we think of legalese as a language, well, you can see my ear is hiding one of those words. If we think of legalese as a language, then we can begin to understand why people react negatively to that language, specifically legalese. You might not react negatively to Italian or German or whatever it might be, but certainly to legalese, people react negatively. There are reasons why lawyers think about written communications in a certain way, and those reasons might, in some ways, defend the use of that language. Now, this is very old-fashioned thinking. This is not what legal English doctrine, legal writing communication doctrine promotes nowadays. But in the past, you would have lawyers who would think, I need to use this language to somehow defend myself or to attack somebody or to make sure that people will pay me money, so they'll pay the lawyer money so that that lawyer can translate the language into normal English so that normal people can understand. And so all of those things and other issues, when you bring them all together, to a certain extent, or not to a certain extent, mainly explain why legalese leads to negativity. And we all know this in practice. If we get a contract, we have the terms and conditions. For example, you've got internet apps, you get, I don't know, a product you might buy, you've got to read the terms and conditions, and it's framed in legalese, for example, contracts, mortgages, whatever it might be. You're reading those things, and if it's framed in legalese, the first reaction that you have is, oh God, I've got to read this. Oh God, it's going to be difficult. Oh, I don't know what I'm reading. That's how people react to legalese. However, I don't think that's the correct way to frame legalese. I don't believe in today's world that we should be talking about legalese as a language. I think it's much more helpful to be thinking about legal terminology that we should know, that you should know as legal professionals, that specific vocabulary, but that it should be presented within well-known and accessible structures. And that's precisely why you get lots of doctrine which says prefer the active voice. So the active voice is the general language of communication. This is how people communicate generally in English. They don't naturally favor the passive voice. They communicate mostly in the active voice because it's a great structure to communicate all parts of the message. Who is doing what is being done, and who is being affected. If we can communicate legal specific vocabulary within that framework, then we are using a professional everyday framework, which is appropriate in terms of business, appropriate in terms of law, but just using legal words within that. And if we do that, instead of using what might be considered traditional legalese structures, so for example, preferring the passive voice, using really long sentences with lots and lots of clauses, using crazy inversions, using difficult conditionals, etc., etc. We just communicate normally using standard structures with legal terminology. People will then be able to access that language a lot better and understand that information. However, there is a massive barrier that stops lawyers particularly from being able to communicate using those standard structures. I'm just going to shrink myself down here in case I wave my hands around and then block the text which is behind me. So, a number of misconceptions, some of which you can see here. So there is a misconception as you're learning legal English that you might think that lawyers need legalese to speak to other lawyers. That's a misconception. Lawyers talk to each other in normal ways, okay? If you spend time amongst lawyers, you'll quickly realize that these are just normal human beings that communicate in normal ways. They don't go back home, talk to their wives and families, or they don't go to the office and talk amongst each other in this kind of crazy legalese way, okay? It just doesn't happen like that. There's a misconception learned through studying that writing must be done in a certain way or style. So you become, as you're learning law, in whichever area of law you are learning in, you're going to read these difficult textbooks, you're going to read these difficult cases, you're going to read this difficult language, and through years and years and years and years of studying this, you become accustomed to the fact that everyone else is writing in this way, therefore I must write in this way as well. However, that unfortunately makes you a victim to the bad legal writing that already exists. Okay, there's a misconception that legalese protects the profession of law. I touched upon this a few moments ago. There are some lawyers that might still be out there, definitely were in the past, that used legalese, the language of legalese, as a barrier to somehow protect their incomes. To say, okay, you want to understand law, I understand it, you don't, therefore you pay me money so I can translate that. In today's world, particularly with Google, now with artificial intelligence, you've got a very, very competitive commercial environment within the area of law. Any lawyer that doesn't speak a client's language or uses artificial barriers to try and get more income, as it were, from their clients is quickly going to be either left or changed, or they're not going to be recommended. So this is not a good commercial strategy to do this, but there might still be people that do this. There is a misconception that legalese is precise. We use these words, we use these structures because they are precise. But you can quickly have a look at some judicial dictionaries such as Stroud's or Words and Phrases, where you can see all of the cases that have been taken to court, where generally, let's give you a context, you have a bank writes a contract, it's written legalese, you've got a client that has to sign the agreement, but the agreement is badly written in a way that the client understands that they don't have certain rights. They take it to court, the judge rules in the client's favor because the agreement, the contract, is badly written, because of the legalese which was used, because of the structures that were used. If the structures that the words that were used were precise, we wouldn't have those court cases. But sadly, we have hundreds, thousands of these cases. So these are clear misconceptions. That is not going to be a surprise. People hate legalese. People turn off when they see legalese. People feel powerless when having to deal with legalese. As I touched upon before, you get a contract, you read it, you don't want to read it, you know you have to read it, you have to try to understand it, you don't know if you understand it, you've got to somehow deal with this. You know that, and that should in itself be enough of a reason for you, as I said, in today's commercial world, for you not to write in legalese. But what might be a surprise are these things. That, as I alluded to before, legal professionals prefer plain English communications. Legal professionals attack mistakes caused by legalese. Why we have those court cases, after all. Using legalese may make you look stupid. Using legalese may make you look less competent. And using legalese is not necessary. Now, those last three issues we know from empirical studies. As you can see above my head, this is a video I did a long time ago, Legalese versus Plain English, an empirical study of persuasion and credibility in appellate brief writing by Benson and Kessler. I would recommend that you go watch that video, find out a little bit more about that empirical study. But one of the findings from that study, and these findings have been repeated in other studies as well, is that there is this impression that if an author uses legalese, that they are somehow using legalese to compensate for the fact that they either don't know what they're talking about, or they compensate for the fact that they are pretending to be at a level higher than they actually are. So those perceptions by readers are very important, and they are definitely something that you should take into account. if you want to, and I'm sure in the future we will be talking about this on this channel, when we have a look at the important judges, for example, the Supreme Court judges in America, the well-known judges in England, and very important well-known judges around the world, they very often comment on, they very often are known for the fact that they themselves communicate using plain language techniques, and that they criticize other lawyers for using those complicated structures. So we've got criticisms, we've got perceptions, we've got understandings that if you use legalese, this might not make you look very good. So in terms of slightly more developed conclusions, yes, you're learning legal English. You know you've got to use legal English in the future. It's an international world. You have to kind of be ready for that. So yes, you need to understand legalese. If someone else is writing using legalese, however much we can criticize that, we still have to try to understand it. But no, you should not be using legalese in your own communications. Not even when you're writing to other legal professionals. Now, that might be difficult to actually allow yourself to do, to say, okay, I'm going to write to a senior partner, I'm going to write to that judge, I'm going to write to whoever it might be. And you lose a little bit of faith in your own writing because you're not using legalese. Resist that temptation to just, in some cases, artificially fill your writing with legalese words. There's just no need for it. What's important is that your communication is clear and that it's understood. Remember, as a writer, you're always thinking about the reader, and the reader is only going to be persuaded if they understand your writing. Legalese is hated by the public and legal professionals. So once again, you fall into that trap of saying, I've got to write to a senior lawyer, therefore I've got to somehow make my writing look better by using legalese. Not only is that wrong from the point that I've just discussed, when that senior lawyer gets the writing, they're not going to like it anyhow. So I mean, really, what are you doing by using legalese? Mate, doesn't make you look good. Okay. Further, you might be able to legally attack others for not using legalese correctly, and lots of lawyers don't use legalese correctly. But in the same respect, if you misuse legalese, they are going to attack your writing as well, and potentially they're going to interpret your writing in a way which favors their interpretation of the contract or whatever it is that you've written. All of these forms, these legalese forms, these structures, whatever you understand to kind of make up that legalese, can always be replaced by other, more accurate and more easily understood forms. That's why, I'll underline again, if you're at a certain point of your career, wherever that might be, and you're thinking about legalese, you might be getting these documents with legalese, and you might be thinking, oh, I've got to use legalese because I'm a lawyer. Resist that temptation. Follow current legal English doctrine. As I said, you've got the ISO, which is here. This is the main, as far as I'm concerned, the most important form of legal writing doctrine that there is. Chapter 2 of the Plain Language ISO, where you've got those 4 principles. Definitely fails 3 of them, might even fail 4 of them. Okay, that's how bad, that's how detrimental legalese is to your writing.